I got the letter on a Tuesday. It was sitting in my inbox between a dental appointment reminder and a coupon for discounted protein powder. The subject line read, Galactic Union Officer Candidacy Program. Congratulations, recruit. I read it 3 times. Then I made coffee, sat down, and read it again. My name is Marcus Vale. I am 24 years old. I used to be a park ranger in Montana, which means I spent 3 years chasing bears away from campsites and explaining to tourists why they should not feed the wildlife. I also trained mixed martial arts on weekends, not because I was particularly talented, but because hitting things in a controlled environment is a reasonable way to manage stress. I am not a soldier. I am not a genius. I am, by most measurable standards, an ordinary person. The letter said I had been selected. It said my psychological profile, physical endurance data, and aptitude scores placed me in the top percentile of candidates reviewed by the Galactic Union's Officer Development Committee. It said a transport would arrive at the nearest GU transit station in 4 days. It said I should pack for an extended stay. I went. I know how that sounds. But the dental appointment was going to cost 400 credits. The protein powder was a brand I didn't like, and I had been alive for 24 years without anything particularly interesting happening to me. So I packed a bag, told my landlord I'd be out for a while, and shipped off on a Friday morning feeling something between excitement and the particular calm that comes right before a bad decision fully reveals itself. The transport was enormous and smelled like engine coolant and something faintly biological I couldn't name. I found my assigned seat, stowed my bag, and looked around at the other passengers for the first time. They were not human. I had known, intellectually, that the Galactic Union contained many species. I had seen images. I had read the public briefings that Earth's Provisional Membership Office released every few months, full of diplomatic language and carefully selected photographs designed to make everything seem friendly and manageable. None of that had prepared me for sharing a pressurized cabin with a creature the size of a refrigerator that had 8 limbs, 3 distinct sets of jaws, and was currently staring at me with an expression I could not read, but instinctively did not enjoy. I smiled at it. It made a sound low in its chest that vibrated the seat beneath me. I turned back to face forward and spent the next 14 hours reading the transport's welcome manual very carefully. Krath Station appeared in the viewport like a gray mountain floating in space. It was angular and enormous, and the docking arm that reached out to meet our transport looked like the claw of something that had been fossilized mid-reach. I felt, for the first time, a specific kind of nervous that I had not felt since I was 8 years old and had accidentally wandered too far into the woods behind my grandmother's house and realized, very quietly, that I did not know the way back. Administrator Crossvell met the arriving cohort in the main docking bay. He was reptilian, roughly 3 meters tall, with scales the color of old iron and eyes that moved independently of each other in a way that I found deeply unsettling. He had a formal bearing and the kind of voice that made the floor resonate slightly when he spoke. He welcomed the new cadets. He spoke about the honor of the program. He moved his gaze slowly across the assembled group, and then his gaze reached me, and it stopped. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. It felt considerably longer. He excused himself from the group, walked to where I was standing, and looked down at me from a height that made me genuinely reconsider every choice I had ever made. He said quietly, "You are human." It was not a question. It was the voice of a man who had just found a fish in his sock drawer and was trying to figure out, with great professionalism, how it had gotten there. He pulled me aside. He explained, carefully and without any visible judgment, that there had been a processing error in the admissions system. Earth's provisional membership had been coded incorrectly in the species classification database. My application had been routed through the wrong program entirely. The Krath Predator Officer Academy was not designed for humans. It had been designed for the 17 species currently recognized by the Galactic Union as apex predators. Species whose evolutionary history, physiological capabilities, and psychological profiles made them natural candidates for high-intensity combat command. He said I could take a shuttle home in 72 hours, with no record of the mistake on any official file. I asked what the training program looked like. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he described it. The endurance trials, the combat scenarios, the survival rotations. The gauntlet at the end of the cycle, which no candidate had ever completed alone, and which many highly capable candidates had not completed at all. I said, "I'd like to stay." He made a sound that I later learned was the Krath equivalent of a slow, disbelieving exhale. He said he would make arrangements. I thanked him. He walked back to the cohort. I stood there for a moment, alone in a corner of a space station built for predators, with one bag and approximately no plan. Then I went to find my bunk. My bunkmate was the 8-limbed creature from the transport. His name was Shet. By his species standards, he was considered something of a coward. He was thoughtful where others were aggressive, cautious where others were bold, and had a tendency to observe before he acted that his instructors had consistently marked as a liability. By my standards, he was a 7-foot creature with the structural strength to bend steel plating, and the first time he saw me extending my hand toward him, he went completely still and stared at it like I had offered him a small explosive device. I explained the handshake. He considered it for a very long time. Then he said that among his people, physical contact between equals was a dominance challenge, and he wanted to confirm, very carefully, that I understood that before he responded. I said I did. He thought about it for another moment, and then, with the careful deliberation of someone deciding whether to defuse a bomb or simply walk away from it, he reached out 2 of his 8 limbs and took my hand. We were fine after that. The other 2 members of what I had already started privately thinking of as my group were Aura, a 4-legged creature from a species that was technically classified as both predator and prey, depending on which planet you were standing on and who was doing the classifying, and Zelton, who was physiologically one of the galaxy's apex predators and psychologically the most anxious individual I had ever met in my life. He vomited when he was stressed. He was stressed often. He was also, I discovered later, a genuinely extraordinary tactical analyst, because anxiety at his scale of intensity produces a kind of obsessive attentiveness to detail that is enormously useful if you can point it in the right direction. We ate together in the mess hall that first night. I shared some of the food I had brought from Earth. Nothing elaborate, just trail mix and a few energy bars, the kind of thing I always carried out of habit from my ranger days. Zelthon examined a cashew for approximately 3 minutes before eating it. He said it was acceptable. Coming from him, I understood this was a significant compliment. The training began the following morning. The Academy's physical evaluation was built around the assumption that every cadet entering the program had a body that had been shaped by millions of years of hunting. The fear response tests were calibrated for species that produced pheromones as threat signals. The burst speed drills were designed for animals built to accelerate from stillness to lethal velocity in under a second. The pain threshold assessments assumed a nervous system wired to keep moving through damage because stopping meant dying. I failed the pheromone test immediately and completely. I produced no measurable threat signal. The assessment machine printed out my results, and the supervising technician looked at them with an expression I can only describe as personally offended. The endurance hall was different. It was a long chamber that cycled through environmental conditions at increasing intensities: extreme cold, extreme heat, sustained sound disorientation, simulated gravitational variance. The idea was to push candidates to the edge of their biological tolerances and measure how their instincts responded under stress. Every species in the cohort had evolved specific adaptations. The Krath were built for heat. Shet's species could regulate their core temperature across a remarkable range. Aura could stabilize her own heartbeat voluntarily, which was frankly alarming to witness. I had no special adaptations. I was just a person from Montana who had spent a lot of time outside in bad conditions and had learned, through nothing more interesting than experience, that discomfort and danger are not the same thing. Discomfort is just unpleasant. It ends. You keep moving until it ends. I was slower than everyone. I completed every trial. Instructor Dravoth noticed me on the 3rd day. He was Krath, senior faculty, and built like something that had been designed in a laboratory to make other things feel small. He called me to the front of the training group during a combat stance demonstration and asked me to show the cohort my fighting position. I did. There was a sound from the assembled cadets that I recognized as laughter, even in the absence of any language I understood. My stance did not look impressive by their standards. Biomechanically, it was extremely efficient. weight distributed correctly, joints aligned for both power generation and quick repositioning. Every major structural muscle group engaged without unnecessary tension. One of the senior cadets, a veteran named Orath who had not laughed, looked at it for a moment and then looked away without saying anything. I noticed that. 3 weeks in, the academy ran its wilderness tracking drill, 40 kilometers of mountain terrain, 6 hours. Candidates were to locate and tag a series of simulated prey signals using whatever approach their instincts recommended. The predator species used burst tactics, short, explosive sprints, full sensory engagement, maximum output over short distances, then rest, then repeat. I jogged, steadily, same pace at kilometer 1 as at kilometer 35. I breathed through my nose. I kept my heart rate in a range I had learned years ago was sustainable for hours, without accumulating the kind of fatigue that compounds into failure. I arrived at the final signal, while 3 of the top-ranked cadets were still recovering from their last sprint. I was not breathing particularly hard. I sat down on a rock and ate a trail bar while I waited for the timer to close. One of the 3 cadets asked me, in the translation-neutral trade language all GU members were required to use in multi-species environments, how I had done that. I explained, as simply as I could, that humans used to hunt large animals on our homeworld by following them at a sustainable pace for hours, or sometimes days, until the animal was too exhausted to run anymore. We had not been the fastest or the strongest thing on our planet. We had simply been the most willing to keep going. All 3 of them went quiet. One of them looked at me in a way that I had not been looked at before on this station. Not with amusement, not with dismissal, with something quieter than either of those things. Dravath escalated 4 weeks in. He set me an individual scenario. Breach a fortified position held by 4 senior cadets. Alone. Full opposing force. No time limit. It was, by any reasonable reading, an impossible task, designed to produce a visible, public failure. The cohort gathered to watch. I stood at the entrance corridor, looking at the sealed cargo bay door for a moment. Then I asked Dravath if there were any restrictions on my approach. He said no. I went quiet for 30 seconds. Then I smiled. I saw 2 of the senior cadets shift their weight in a way that I had learned, in my time here, indicated something adjacent to unease. I had spent every hour of my first 3 weeks reading station schematics on my personal terminal. I liked knowing where I was. It was a habit from the forest. You learn the terrain before anything happens, so that when something happens, you are not learning and reacting at the same time. I knew where the ventilation access panels were. I knew where the breaker junctions ran. I knew that the training stingers carried by the senior cadets had a maximum effective range of 4 meters. I was in the cargo bay's overhead duct for 6 minutes. Then I found the junction I had memorized and cut the lights. 90 seconds after that, all 4 cadets were tagged. I had not been touched once. When Dravath reviewed the footage, he said I had cheated. Orath, who had been one of the 4 cadets inside, said, from the floor where he was sitting, he didn't cheat. He planned. We didn't. Dravath did not respond to that. The gauntlet ran for 18 hours. My team, Shet, Ora, Zelthon, and me, went through it with the doctrine we had built together over the preceding weeks. Zelthon's anxiety made him extraordinary at real-time threat analysis. Ora's environmental awareness meant we were never flanked. Shet's patience held our prepared positions better than anyone in the program. I held the system together and kept talking in a low, even voice the entire time, because I had learned long before this station that people move better when someone near them sounds like they are not afraid. At hour 14, the simulation flagged Zelthon as a casualty. I redistributed the roles in under 40 seconds and kept moving. We completed the gauntlet with the second highest score in Academy history. Administrator Crossvell reviewed my file the day after. He told me the clerical error had been officially noted. Then he said they would not be correcting it. He handed me my commission documents. At the ceremony, Dravath spoke about each graduating cadet in turn. When he reached me, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, to the entire assembled cohort, Cadet Vale operated without the advantages this institution was designed to provide. He built his own. He didn't look happy about it. I didn't need him to. Afterward, I went back to my bunk to pack. Shet was there, sitting on his end of the room, with all 8 limbs folded in the posture I had learned meant he was content. Aura was there. Zelfon was there, looking slightly green but smiling in the way his species smiled, which involved a lot of teeth and was still, after months, mildly alarming at close range. We had all been assigned to the same posting. I may have quietly mentioned, in a conversation with Administrator Crossvell the week before, that our team had performed best as a unit, and that separating high-performing units was operationally inefficient. He had agreed, in the careful way of someone who suspected he was being managed, but couldn't find the exact moment it had happened. Shet extended 2 of his limbs toward me. He had remembered. I shook his hand. Somewhere in the Galactic Union's admissions database, there is probably a note that says "Do not repeat." But I have seen how they run their filing system. I wouldn't count on it.